Hey, what's up, everybody? Dr. Ray, and we are talking about what happened during the 2008 recession in the instructional design, learning and development, whatever you want to call it, field. I'm going to talk about this from my perspective, basically what I saw, what I witnessed at the time. I was in the field. I entered in late 2002. So I had been in the field for, 7 to 8 years before the, economy tanked. And the reason I bring this up is a lot of people have been talking about like, well, if we do have another recession, they've been saying like due to inflation, Ukraine war, oil, gas, everything, we're going to have a new recession. Stock market's down, my portfolio is down 30%. And people are kind of curious. And one of the things we can do is learn about what happened in 2008, what we witnessed. And to see kind of maybe what could happen now. Now, clearly things are different and you can never predict the future. If I could predict the future, I would have invested in the stock market in like Bitcoin and be like riding around in my $1 billion yacht right now. But I'm not. I can't predict the future, but I can tell you about the past that I've experienced. So let's start 2008. All right, so first of all, I had been in instructional design. I had been working in corporate, and then I started working on my doctorate degree in 2007. So I was working on my PhD like about the time when we started seeing like these problems in like the housing market. So the first things that happened overall in 2008 was that lots of people in the finance industry, the housing market crashed and the finance industry crashed. All my friends who were in finance lost their jobs right away. Now, how did that trickle down and affect like instructional designers and did it? So all of my friends, all of my friends in finance, I had investment banker friends, friends in like property management and stuff. All of them literally lost their jobs overnight. Some of them lost tons of money. It's painful for them to even talk about it today. But eventually that trickled down to the rest of the economy, trickled down into the sectors that ID is in, like corporate, government, and higher ed. So what did it do to us? So were we cut? Did we do okay? How did ID do? So first of all, I will say that ID is unique in that we can thrive through a recession, but it might involve switching jobs, switching sectors, that kind of thing. So let's talk about it. So first of all, what happened in corporate? Corporate, as soon as all the finance people were laid off, basically companies got in this mindset where they needed lots of cash and were scared for the future. So what they did is companies started to just almost like a bank run, like let go of everyone that didn't directly bring money into the company. Now, training is a much needed thing. We have an ROI. We are very important to an organization, but when we're talking about the bottom line, we were very easy to cut. I wouldn't say we were the first, but we were near the top of the people who were cut pretty quick. So that's in corporate, what corporate America did. We were cut, and literally for, I'd say 18 months, solid year and a half, there were very few, if none, like jobs, and I mean very few, like needle in a haystack jobs in corporate. I mean, there were people finding them, but it was really rare and very difficult if you were in training to find a position. I was on a listserv at the time with a group of students that I had not students, but people that I had worked with or people who were alumni that I was friends with, basically like a bunch of friends. And a lot of them ended up leaving the field. I had some friends go back to law school. I had a lot of people went to college. I had a lot of friends go back to law school. One of my friends went into comm. A number of people that I was working with went into cybersecurity, basically transitioned fields and just kind of left. It was pretty much a good portion of people that I worked with over a period of about from 2008 to 2010 that just left the field. It was a pretty big number. There just wasn't positions at companies. Now, higher ed and government were a little different. So higher ed, basically once the economy tanked and everyone started like losing their jobs and stuff, this didn't impact higher ed right away because most of higher ed, at least in the public space, relies on tax dollars. So tax dollars were still coming in that year. So it hadn't impacted higher ed just yet. But higher ed was pretty quick to act. And basically what they did is they didn't fire people, but what they did is they froze lots of positions. So like no colleges were hiring. I was working on my doctorate at the time, and this was very scary for me because I was like, there's not going to be any jobs listed when I graduate in 2010. So I started looking for alternatives and thinking like I might be going and doing something else while I was working on my PhD. Fortunately, I did get a job and everything worked out. But even like when I was applying for jobs in 2010 at the faculty level, like there were none. I mean, very few. Like I got really lucky that I did get a job. But colleges were on hiring freezes, so they really were not hiring any people. Like there were years when colleges were on hiring freezes, and a position could only be, opened up if it was like emergency type position needed to be filled. But they were frozen, so higher ed really wasn't hiring. But lots of students were going back to higher ed. So there were some positive things happening like around like 2012, but let's stay in 2008 for now. And then I'll get to kind of what happened. So higher ed kind of froze all their jobs. They weren't really hiring anymore. Then let's get into what happened in government. Now, does government ever get smaller? It really doesn't. And government really didn't slow down. So if you were working for one of the consulting firms like McKinsey, Booz Allen, Accenture, Northrop, Lockheed Martin, any of the big military contractors, you were pretty safe. In fact, those places were pretty much still hiring at the time. Government itself, like federal, state government, they were still hiring at the time too. Some of them started to actually freeze positions, but they were still hiring. There were still people getting jobs in those sectors. The thing about those sectors, and it's a much safer sector, is that the job requirements are usually much stricter. Usually there's an education, like a master's degree required. A lot of times they might require prior military service, or they want you to have or be available to get a security clearance. So those jobs are not super easy to get, but they were stable during the recession, and they didn't stop or really get frozen. Certain like state governments might have frozen in certain states, but the federal government itself never did. So getting into like 2010, job market's very slowly starting to recover. By about 2012, 2013, we'd pretty much recovered from where we were as far as jobs. But it took a solid 4 years before we got to that point. So from recession in 2008 to 2010, you were starting to see signs of life. Like 2010, you were starting to see companies say, oh shoot, we got rid of our training department, but we're realizing we actually need training. It's a valuable thing. So they started hiring people back, but it was a slow process, and salaries were low, and there were lots of people looking for things. It was kind of like this time where the motto from everyone, no matter what your political affiliation is or where you worked, was kind of like, I'm lucky to have a job. And there was this mindset that, hey, you're lucky to have a job right now. You're lucky to have a job. So pay was pretty low. Companies were able to keep pay low for people. But people were able to start to slowly trickle in and get jobs. And with that, increased our training jobs and stuff. So by about 2012, we were back to normal. By 2014, training industry started to really kick butt and boom again. And then we got to where we are today, where with COVID, and training industry is huge. So let's talk about, so that's basically like what happened during the recession, how it played out, what I saw, what I witnessed. There were a lot of people who went back to college to change careers and stuff, or come into instructional design. People went back and got something. So let's talk about if we do have a recession. Now, again, currently. Now, first of all, as I said, I'm not a future predictor. I don't want to try to predict what could happen, but I think this will be interesting for me to go back, even though like my recollection and reflection of 2008 is kind of like me capturing it on video right now. I still want to talk about like the future and if we had a recession right now, because I think it'll be fun to go back and watch this video in like 3 to 5 years to see if anything I said was actually accurate. What happened? So let's say we do have a recession. I mean, it could happen tomorrow. It could never happen. We don't know, They say the best time to buy a stock was yesterday. So, you have no idea when a recession could or could not happen. But let's say it did happen. Let's say all these prediction, doom and gloom articles that we're seeing across the news are correct, and we do end up having a recession. What do I expect to see happen? I expect things to be very similar. I expect corporate to be the first to let people go, and definitely like the most willing to. And in fact, I already see it happening on some of the forums. I'm seeing people talk about like, our team has changed. Our team is letting people go, and they're scared. Companies are starting to hold on to cash again, just like what happened in 08. Obviously not as bad, but I'm slowly like seeing some signs of it. Like there's some signs of it. As far as what's going to happen in higher ed, right now, higher ed is completely fine. Certain colleges are doing bad because of low enrollment, but in general, colleges that have been smart and fiscally smart throughout the last few years are doing really well right now, and I don't see them slowing down unless their tax dollars change. So we're still kind of waiting for that to happen. As far as government, I mean, we've got a Ukraine war, we've got all kinds of stuff. I don't see government slowing down, especially like the military contractors. I see them as a huge industry going forward. But again, if you know that's what you want to do, the requirements are much more stricter. Usually there is a requirement for education, if not a master's degree, for many of the jobs on USA Jobs, and you know, you also sometimes you need to have military service. That's more rare, but you sometimes do, and sometimes you do need that security clearance or be able to get a security clearance. So, you know, the interesting thing was, so that's kind of like my prediction of the future. Like, I think it's going to be very similar. We'll see corporate let go more. I think that we'll see higher ed remain very similar, and I think we'll see government continue to increase. I mean, it's interesting to think about. In 2008, your only options during the recession were switch careers, go back to school, or try to get into military contracting. Um, you know, you didn't have many options. And I mean, we could potentially be there again, especially if you look at like the way instructional design field is going, where if jobs are online, all of a sudden there's more and more people who can apply to them. There's many people entering the field. So already jobs are becoming like this. It's not needle of a haystack right now. It's not that bad, but it could potentially get there, especially as companies stop offering positions or freeze up positions or let people go. So you'll start to see that those corporate jobs become a needle in the haystack. And then the government jobs have stricter requirements, but also they're usually face to face, which means like if you don't live in like, you know, I live by Fayetteville, North Carolina, I'm in Wilmington. If you don't live in Fayetteville, North Carolina, you're not going to get the job at Fayetteville, North Carolina, because you got to be there. So those jobs are sometimes a little tougher to get. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens. And I'd love for you guys to all like comment below as things do happen. Tell me about what you're experiencing or what you're seeing. But that's what happened in '08. And that's kind of, you know, where I see the state of the industry right now. So anyway, later all.